Welcome to Literature Live, The Brightness of Books, a series presented by Reliance Industries Limited, in which we try to dispel the gloom surrounding us some days through new books. And today we have none other than Shobhaa Day, good friend, tasty columnist, wonderful novelist, and who's written SRILAAJI. And here it is. Shobhaa, let's see your copy of the book.
Only too happy to share it.
Right. Okay. Shobhaa, it's a bit odd for a conversation to start at the end, but let me do that. And with the acknowledgement, which you put at the end, where you talk about your publisher, Simon and Schuster, who had asked you to do a non-fiction book. But, and I'm quoting you, SRILAAJI came into your life, you're saying. I didn't choose SRILAAJI. SRILAAJI chose me. She's for real, even if I imagine her. Now this seems unreal to me because here you are supposed to write a non-fiction book, and suddenly you're saying this character comes from nowhere into your mind and insists you write about it. Tell us about it.
Writers lead crazy lives. Things take unpredictable. You walk down paths you have not even thought of walking down. It happens very unexpectedly. And it is not the first time that this has happened. This is probably the second or third time in the writing of novels that something like this has occurred to me. First time was when I wrote Socialite Evenings, my very first book, more than 30 years ago, when I had no desire to turn novelist in the first place. And David Devidar, then, who just set up Penguin India, had come to my home, and you know how David is, larger than life, imperious, and sort of commanded me to write a book. And I sort of fibbed just to, get to end the conversation. And I said, sure, I'll write a book. He also suggested non-fiction, and I also turned it around and made it fiction, which was Socialite Evenings. And that also kind of wrote itself. But back then, there was a reason why that had happened. I was hugely pregnant. The book he wanted was non-fiction about the city of Mumbai. Now, I was in no condition to sort of pound the pavements of Mumbai researching that kind of a book. So I had two choices. I could tell him, forget it, I'm not writing any book. Or I could tell him, listen, that's not the book I want to write, which is what I did. So he didn't give up, exactly like my publishers at Simon & Schuster. And mind you, I was an unpublished author at the time, unpublished writer of books. I was a columnist. So he said, fine, go for it, write your novel. And I'm coming across this afternoon, and you better have an outline ready. And I actually wrote out the outline of Socialite Evenings with an eyebrow pencil on a brown paper laundry bag. And he came that afternoon. It must have been the most unexpected outline ever presented to David Devidar by any author on earth. And he said, yes, I like it, and write it. That's your job. Go ahead and write this book. Similarly with Simon & Schuster, the book I planned for them, or they planned, we planned together, was non-fiction. And I was all set to have them over to, they were coming with the contracts for signatures. When SRILAAJI, and I'm not making this up, Anil, she came to me fully formed. And pretty much I was again, under a shower in my bedroom, no writing implements, because I don't keep those in my bedroom. And she just said, listen, what are you thinking of? Forget that book. It may be a great book, but this book is the book you should be writing, and it should be about me. I promise you, none of this is exaggerated. It's surrealistic. It sounds nuts, but that's how it happened. And she came to me exactly as you meet her and read about her in the book.
Yeah, but on one hand, you say that you imagined her, obviously.
Yes.
Fiction. Yet you're saying she came fully formed. And she insists as if here was a real person, or let's say a spirit or something, which seemed to have control over you and was dictating to you and dictating to the undetected did Shobhaa take to do her bidding? I just don't understand that at all.
Well, it was no spirit, it was no apparition. I don't believe in such stuff. But when I say that for all my novels, the characters become so real, and I have to hear that first voice very strongly. I actually hear it inside my head. Once I get the voice right, once I have a conversation going with these imagined and imaginary characters, I know I have a novel. Till that happens, nothing works. I can, go on with plots and keep talking about, oh, this chapter, that chapter, till I hear that voice. And I heard her voice as clearly as I'm hearing you now. She was not a ghost, nothing. She was talking to me inside my head. And somehow she's become a part of my life. She's very deep. She's not based on any one person at all. She is 100% imagined, but to me, real.
Yeah, but then the question to ask is that do you think that someone real in your memory, stored away somewhere in the back, who just came to you unbidden, someone you had met, perhaps or read about, or known or heard about, whatever, and someone you had forgotten completely about, she came to you. Is that possible?
Yes, it is in fact the trigger because I did meet a lady who intrigued me a lot. I don't really know her at all, but we did have a long, extended conversation over a long, extended afternoon, and she did not leave my imagination. But she is not Shrilaji. She was merely the trigger. And since she had refused to get out of my life very easily, and she's not a friend of mine, she's not someone I know very well at all. She's not a public person. She's not famous. She's just a woman whose spirit I enjoyed. I just loved how she was. I guess she happened to be Marwari and a very unlikely Marwari lady of a certain vintage. But she definitely fascinated me because of how open and freely she exchanged some aspects of her life, which I I believe she may not have ever had the courage to maybe share with anybody else previously. And we were two strangers meeting in the afternoon. She probably figured I'm never going to meet this lady again. And a certain empathy happened, as it happens very often with me and strange ladies I meet in strange cities. And that's how, that was the merely a trigger. It was not Shrilaji talking to me that afternoon, but definitely inspired by that conversation.
So has this happened to you before in the novels you've written before? Uh, has something like this happened? Suddenly, this character demands that he or she be written about. Uh, the last book, novel you wrote, I remember, was Seiji, which
Yes.
was really
With
about
no,
a.
Seth G, I heard the conversation in my head. I saw him, I visualized him. But with him, it was something that was years of looking at all our oily, greasy politicians of a certain ilk. Uh, at that time, one could think of Sitaram Kesri, for example. So, Seth was kind of a composite of many such politicians, ambitious politicians from smaller parties, not necessarily big time players, but they have the sleaze factor in common. So, yes, Sethji's conversation, his voice, I did hear, but not with the urgency and not as vividly as I heard Srilaji.
Yeah. So I think one of the things about this book I found is that your recreation of Marwari home, especially the child's upbringing, Sheilaji's where she, really, if you look at it in a conventional way, she is neglected by her parents. The father is a distant figure, and her mother is this glamorous woman who fits in and out of her life. And there's really Boaji who's central to her life in many ways. Now, is this something you know about? You have friends who have this?
Yes, it's not that unusual. I mean, a neglected young girl in a family which is dysfunctional, it's not. that unique. In her case, the mother has mental health issues, but which no one ever talks about. It's a secret. It's a secret. It's a family secret. It's something
Yeah, but you don't know about that in the end anyway.
yeah, so yes, you don't find that out. It's just a mysterious and very beautiful lady who flits in and out of her young daughter's life without a single meaningful conversation. There is an absentee father who's too busy rejecting the mother and focusing on his business interests and his golf and his whatever else he's preoccupied with. But the daughter certainly not his priority. And there is the Buaji, whose sole job is to make sure this young girl gets married off properly, and then her duty towards the family is done. But there's no one to instruct the girl. There's no one to talk to her about things that one talks about within families, and that could be the girl's own sexuality. It could be her emergence from a prepubescent protected schoolgirl to suddenly being thrown into womanhood and with nothing at all, no roadmap, no guidance, nothing. So she is lost in that sense as a young girl, but she soon finds herself without looking at society and community around her to provide a framework for her to be uniquely her own person. I think that's the whole point of the book.
Yeah, and she's so neglected in one way, that she, when she has a first period, and this is how you start the book, she doesn't even know what it is. Uh,
Yes.
uh, that she just feels something strange is happening to her, and she thinks she's dying, and it's her first
Yep.
period. And at the age of 12, she's unaware of what is happening.
It's extremely common, Anil, in today's day and age because these are taboos we still have not broken through at all. Till Pac-Man and movies like that came along and popular culture started accepting that women do menstruate, they have periods. It was something our society did not talk about at all. And girls, to, to date, they're considered dirty, unclean, often even in traditional families, so-called educated families, they don't eat with the family always. They have a room which they're meant to go to if it's a large mansion like the one Srila occupies as a young girl. It's often left to nannies and maids to explain these, facts of life, and they do it in their own manner, I'm sure, with good intentions, but it's not always a very informed discussion that you have. And they are very lost and left to their own devices. So it's no exaggeration. Not at all. Even in today in Mumbai, you'd be amazed at the number of families, people you and I know, who have never ever broached the topic of a girl maturing or having any kind of sexual feelings.
So you're saying sex education is completely ignored, and girls just find out for themselves through experience, and through false information very often, right?
Very often. And often from their peer group, often at school, where they can be, if they are in a co-ed school, they can be teased, they can be made to feel ridiculous, awkward, ashamed. If they stain their uniforms, everybody is laughing at them. Even the teachers can be very insensitive. I know I've been through this myself at school, and I'm talking about my own personal experiences growing up as a track athlete and playing a lot of sport representing the school and in the school athletics and in netball and hockey and so on. And my periods, I dreaded them because it was such a huge secret. And yes, I did stain my uniform a few times. About. I mean, I wanted to dig a hole and jump into it because everybody only talked about that and sniggered behind your back. So it's nothing that I think most 90% of young girls in our society have probably experienced it at one time or the other.
But on one hand, you have someone who's so very innocent, and the other, she has these sexual fantasies. How is that possible? Isn't that
Because
a
the sexual fantasies, there is I believe fantasy, there are no taboos whatsoever. Your imagination determines your fantasies, and there is no limit to even a young girl's imagination. After all, she's not blind or deaf or in any other way not observing people around her. She can't be non-receptive to stimuli. She may not know what exactly she's feeling or meant to feel, but she feels it regardless, nevertheless. And her mind is going to be driven by so many different fantasies, which okay, sure, they're untamed, they are unfiltered, and that's what fantasy is all about. There can be no kind of censorship on fantasy.
Well, let me say that some of the fantasies are pretty wild, right, for the book. And, well, uh, I don't know how the readers are going to react to them. Let's see.
Well, well, I hope the readers are truthful enough about their own fantasies, so they may not be that shocked, because I don't believe there's any person on earth who does not fantasize. Our fantasies may be different. They may be less wild, more wild, much wilder than anything I have suggested. But fantasy is what keeps all of us kind of floating in another dimension, which is away from our normal lives and normal selves. And fantasy plays a very key role in inspiring. It's all about imagination and what you allow that fantasy, how much of it do you let into your life in a way that is is maybe preventing you from getting on with what you need to get on with, like household chores or writing or whatever. There are a lot of people who escape into fantasy in a way that is perhaps deemed unhealthy by normal standards.
My some of my feeling is that you had great fun writing these fantasies.
Of course, I had a wonderful time writing these fantasies, and I would recommend that to everybody, even if it's just as part of your personal diary, because fantasies do liberate you incredibly. But a woman who writes about fantasies, or a woman like SRILAAJI in the book, who is uh, sharing those fantasies, there is always a different set of rules, isn't there? There's the criteria would define. I mean, a man having many multiple fantasies of all sorts, even putting them all out there, maybe in movies, dreams of passion, for example. But a woman doing exactly the same thing, it's very, very, in a way, threatening to society at large. That, oh my God, what is she thinking? Because there's always, but always, a vicarious interest in finding out about more about a woman, her fantasy life, her real life. Has she experienced all of this? Is she merely dreaming about all of this? Is she longing for something? And it was about time, I felt very strongly, that someone like speaking, like SRILAAJI, talking to other women out there and freeing them of that guilt. I mean, women are entitled to their fantasies as much as men.
Yeah. Now, at one point, Sheilaji said, "I'm proud of my Marwari genes, that
Yes.
it, it allows me to take risks and so on," which she does with some of the business ventures which you write about. Uh, but most of the risks she takes are with her sexual partners. Now,
Yes.
is that part of Marwari culture?
That's a very leading question. It cannot be said about any culture. All cultures, all communities have their own various quirks, and they have their strengths, and they have so many multiple aspects that define the community. So there's no such generalization. She is a person, she's an individual who happens to be a Marwari lady. But it could be as true of a Maharashtrian woman in a large joint family, or a lady living down south. And the reason why I talk when you ask the question about risks, well, a girl like her who's hardly been allowed to express herself in a business aspect of participating in a Marwari joint family. She's married very young. It's not like today's young Marwari girls. The opportunity for her comes much later in life, when she is more sure of herself, and sure of herself as a businesswoman, ready to take financial risks. Till then, the only risk she can possibly take is with her body, her sexuality, her adventures, what can free her from this feeling of being suppressed or kept in some sort of a box, imprisoned, maybe by her own standards of what she wants out of life and what is expected from her. But definitely, her breakthrough can only come via the limited interactions she has with people that she meets, particularly the men that she happens to meet, not by design, but often accidentally.
Yes, but did you think of expanding that business part? You kind of gloss over it. You know, business ventures. Uh, now, business is very much part of Marwari genes and culture. It's kind of
Yes.
ingrained into their genes, I think. uh, but that you only touch upon. Why is that? Did you think it would take it in another direction which you didn't want it to go?
I didn't want to focus on just, she comes up with a brilliant and original business idea, which the family supports. By then, she's already moved on, and she's moved on in a way that she wants to get away from she wants to do this on her own. She's doesn't need family support. She doesn't want family backing, doesn't want family money. And she thinks she's done this so she can hand over something to the useless druggy son. She's done with it. She has some other interests by then.
Yeah. A couple of things which struck me. One was Squirrel, her husband, whom she calls Squirrel, and his relationship with a young man called Sumitra, which is not platonic at all. Now, this becomes a very open relationship, which, which
Yes.
she accepts. Now, is that at all a, a likely scenario? This is something which is, bothering, that she's so seems so comfortable with it, that her husband is with her and he has sexual relations with her. But he do the same with a man, and it's like a menage a trois in a sense.
Well, it's not exactly a menage a trois because she's
No,
not
they don't live together.
participating in sexual activity with either of the two men at that point together.
Yeah, yeah.
She has a very tender relationship. By then, she and he have both evolved to a wonderful and very pleasant and loving kind of a stage in their married life. They understand one another perfectly. She understands and accepts his deep love and passion for another man without feeling threatened by it, which would be a very conventional way of for a wife to react, whether her husband falls in love with another man or another woman. She does feel threatened by another woman who she knows the husband is not going to have any sexual relationship with because by then he's already with Shumitra. But she does show that she'll claw the other woman if it came to that. But with the other guy, she is not. She understands and loves her husband enough. It's the most beautiful and perfect and pure relationship in the book. I mean, Squirrel is with her even after, he's with her throughout to the end of the book. He's always there and he loves her deeply. Him being with another man does not dent his feelings for his wife.
Yeah. The I think one of the central things in the book is this lover in Delhi, who she really falls very madly in love with, and he's a pretty nasty, dominant character. They're real nasty. One of the worst kind of men you can think of. Yet she takes everything from him. He calls
Yes.
Kutti, for example, and she accepts this subservient role. Now, is that, you think, something that was necessary for her to go to this uh, period of almost debasement, in a sense, to finally go into a position where she can start asserting herself?
I've seen that happen so often with extremely accomplished and beautiful and successful and independent women. When they fall for that rogue, the man who sweeps them off their feet and robs them of all reason, all their principles, everything is, goes down the tube. They become obsessed. They want to possess that man. They want him to have no other and nobody else in his life. I've seen women crumble, the strongest of women. I guess that's the power of love and the power of sexuality. That even someone like a Srilaji finds herself pretty powerless and in that subservient role when it comes to that one single man. And her husband understands even that. He understands her obsession. And in so many different and sweet and touching ways, he tries to make things work for her, even with this beast of a man who doesn't deserve her at all. So that is the level of her relationship and bond with her husband. And he's not he's not a bechara. He's a man who truly knows the meaning of the word love. And love can often transcend issues of this kind of being possessive and being with a man or being with a woman or falling deeply in love with someone else, and yet you continue to love as deeply because their bond is that sort of a bond. I find their relationship very inspiring, hers and Squirrel's.
I can't see you, for example, ever tolerating a man like that.
Do you think a man like that would ever dare take 10 steps in my direction? I doubt it. So I would never ever be in that position in my life. And I often feel that the ladies I have known, friends of mine, who have gotten into those situations, and I have tried as a good girlfriend. But you know what, Anil? It does not work. A woman in love is a woman in love. You can tell her what you want. They actually end up hating you till that relationship ends sometimes very brutally. And then it's time for, oh, you would want me. I wish I'd listened to you. But a woman in love, a man in love, they do what they have to do and pay the price for it. And that's how it's always been.
And I suppose we've seen enough examples of very public figures whose husbands have openly had relationships with other women. There are a lot of examples
Yes.
in Bollywood, for example, and
Yes.
they've stood by their husbands or stood with the husbands, saved their marriage, and finally they've got the husband back. Uh, as if that is the aim in life. And in the passage of all this, uh, they don't mind losing their self-respect. So it's not so uncommon. Yes.
It's not even about getting their husband back, Anil, because they never had him in the first place. What they had was a position within society as Mrs. So and so. They're hanging on to that. That's it. They will not let go the perks of being Mrs. So and so. And that's what they want back because they feel at some stage that the husband just may walk away from them, divorce them, leave them stranded, which is a very real fear. I mean, what does a woman in her 50s do if all her life has been invested in a marriage, in her children, in her in-laws, and the husband suddenly decides to waltz off with a young girlfriend? It's happened over and over again to countless women, you and I both know, and it is very unfair. I mean, at that stage in her life, what does she fall back on? So if she at that point decides that she has invested enough of everything of herself, and she wants to fight for that status and retain that position for herself and perhaps for her children. Well, it's all fair, I think.
Yeah, but I can understand that when there's an economic pressure, if the wife has
Yes.
no money at all, and then how is she going to survive? But when there's no economic pressure, she has money of her own. Even then, or she can get a divorce settlement from a very well-off husband. Even then, so many will move.
It's tough for ladies of a certain vintage to be single women, not just in India but across the world. You'd be surprised at the number of ladies, for example, in a city like New York, where you'd expect, oh my God, everything is kind of so chilled out. People accept, divorcees. They accept divorce. They accept what comes with it. Despite all of that, society continues to be extremely judgmental. And I have women in Mumbai coming and telling me in this day and age, some of them much younger than myself, that even today when we walk into a room and we've been divorced now for 10 years, we have established our own specific identity as young professionals, but people, when we walk in, will still point out and say, "Oh, she's a divorcee." I mean, she left her husband or her husband left her. So those value judgments have not disappeared, are not likely to disappear. So it's not a very comfortable decision for a woman to take. Not even for a man, I would imagine. It is always tough. Whoever may say whatever, divorce can never be something that anybody would actively want for themselves, ever. It is very painful, and whoever has been through it will tell you that. And if there are children from that marriage and there are children from other marriages, it is equally challenging and it is very, very hard. So I completely get it when there are women. If you're talking about movie star wives, most of them don't really have careers to fall back on. They're only known as Mrs. Superstar. What are they going to do at this stage? They may have all the money in the world, but they also know that the minute they cease being Mrs. Superstar, society, their community, their so-called closest friends will drop them. They're dead meat overnight. So yes, they have the money, but what are they going to do with that money? It's very cold just to have a lot of money and a bank balance and maybe mansions across the world. But what do you do with all that if you're not going to share it with?
Right. Coming back to the book, I found one of the most interesting characters was the great man, the grand man, almost the last relationship, SRILAAJI's last relationship. And I really wish you had devoted more pages to him because he seems really such a otherworldly figure in many ways. At the same time, he's of this world, obviously with SRILAAJI. But in one way, he seems to be above it, almost a spiritual level.
Yeah.
Why don't you write a book about him next time?
That's a good idea because I loved him myself. I felt, and I have known people like that who are truly noble, really noble, evolved, aware, maybe seeking something spiritually that's not apparent. It's not about going to an ashram and chanting bhajans. It's not about any of that, following a guru. It's just your own individual growth as a human being, and you've seen a lot in your life, you've experienced a lot, and at that stage, much later in your life, you're very clear about what you want and what you definitely don't want. And when you've had so much and you start feeling a sense of gratitude and you start looking for something much deeper, and it goes beyond having a woman to warm your bed or having sex with a much younger woman or having a trophy companion or a trophy wife. It has much more to do with uh, actually loving another person, respecting that other person in a way that enhances both your lives. You both bring so much to one another, and you're not seeking anything from one another. Srilaji is not looking for anything from this man, really, and he's not looking for anything from her. He's just a very kind person, and she's very lucky to know so many different kinds of loves and lovers in a way which I think enriches a woman like her who does not really abide by convention and society's rules. And she has had the opportunity and the good fortune to have a life in so many ways, enriched with so many different experiences.
Yeah. Why did you not give him a name? In fact, why did you not
But
give?
actually, none of the guys have names in the book.
Yeah, why didn't you give them names? You can't have been short of names. So it's
Yeah, there's that man, there's Ruchir from Raipur.
there's chicken roll, there's AC, there's squirrel.
Roll, yeah. I think there's also, then squirrel becomes dead squirrel in the end. I mean, she calls him dead squirrel. I think Srila Ji has a way of distancing herself from relationships, intimacies of a kind that require an emotional connect of even calling the man by his name. So she prefers to maintain that for herself as for her own reason. It's that man or chicken roll is easier than. I don't even think she cares very much what their real names are. She values the relationship more than the name.
Yeah. I love this sentence. This Marwari widow, a whip in one hand, a checkbook in the other. That's a fantasy. So,
Yeah, well, in a way, yes. But I've known some really hard-headed, very practical, very shrewd, tough chitties who do operate with a checkbook in one hand. They really do feel they can buy their way out of almost anything in life, and that their wonderful surname, which is established sometimes across India, it's a very recognized surname of a business group, for example, who feel they don't need to feel they're not obliged on any level. That sense of entitlement is something that is scary but also very fascinating. I've encountered many such ladies, and I find it very amusing actually, because there's no sense of distance, there's no sense of irony. They don't even know how ridiculous they may appear to other people, and they only talk money, they only talk in terms of how much, and unabashedly so. There's no embarrassment. I mean, most of us from a very different background, speaking for myself, from a middle class background, an educated background, discussing money and talking money was an act of vulgarity. I mean, one never talked money, one still doesn't. You don't talk about things you own, never. You don't flaunt things that you possess, never. It's just so crass.
uh, well, someone could say that it is sexual liberation the only way for a woman to assert herself. It, aren't there other ways of doing so? How would you
The
react?
sexual would be to trade her body because she had no other currency. Is that what you're saying? Is that what you're asking? It's still true, Anil. I mean, we go to different levels of our society. We go to the poorest of the poor. We go to middle class struggling to make ends meet, educate their kids, feed their families. What other currency does a woman have if she's desperate? I mean, the most, well, it starts when she actually begins to sell or pawn her stridhan. And that, for a Hindu woman, I can talk about in that context, would be the ultimate sacrifice, or it would be something so shameful and humiliating if she has to go and sell her bangles, which were given at the time of a wedding. I mean, the Mangalsutra would be the last to go, but those are the symbols that have defined her existence. And for her to be forced into that would be something truly terrible, would make her do that. And as the last and final resort, what else does she have? Her youth, her allure, her availability, her beauty, and her body.
So, what you're saying, in effect, is that this is not a criticism of womanhood, but of the system and society. Is that right?
Absolutely, absolutely right. It is what it is, not just in India. Again, let me emphasize, we are talking about India because we know India. At least we think we know India, though there are thousands and thousands of India we don't know. So we can only talk from our own observation and our own personal experiences of people who we have met through our long lives and careers. Like you have, I have, as being journalists and being editors, we've had the luxury of interacting with some of the great and most creative minds on earth, as well as the lowest, most underprivileged segment of our society. So our minds have always been open to each and every experience, and each and every human experience has its own validity. So why pass judgments on anyone?
Tell me, this novel is written in the first person. Uh,
Yes.
did you have to agonize over that, whether it would be first person, third person, or is that something which you thought was natural because this Siraji was sitting opposite you and issuing orders, write my story, and as I say, is that happen? Because this is
It
always a
could,
big decision for a novelist, right? To
yeah.
decide what is the point. So,
It could only but only be written in the first person. I wanted it to be Shrilaji's voice, loud and clear, an extremely specific voice, a very individualistic voice, and it could not have been written in the third person because I was almost like possessed by Shrilaji in the writing of the book. So it was very cathartic in a way for me to be writing this book, and I had to write it as as I wrote it in the first person.
okay.
The
I think,
authenticity of a voice would not have come through,
yeah.
I felt.
I, I think before we go to the questions, I'd like you to read right at the end. And I think that kind of sums up her personality in a way. Right at the end.
Yeah, I'll be happy to read it. I mean, because you know what? This is, I have to say this before I read this, that to a lot of people have asked me, phoned and asked me, they've read the excerpts, they've read some of the passages, and so, madam, is this a hot book? Now, it's one way of, in a way, diminishing someone's work by saying, is it a hot book? Or it's kind of demeaning for a woman they imagine to answer, is it a hot book? I have no problems answering, yes, it is a hot book. So read it at your own peril or read it for your own enjoyment because it is unapologetically erotic. So I will read the last 3 lines and let me
Did,
pay for the other lines.
did anyone call it a non-vegetarian book? That is another
Not
phrase.
yet, but I'm expecting that too. But yes, non-vegetarian. Yes, yes, hot is what hot kitab likha hai aapne. This is also the trade getting very excited. The booksellers, because they've reordered copies already, and it's just been out for a day, because they're very excited at the thought of Srilaji and the hot book. So I'm not complaining. I'll read the last 3 lines. Give me uncut, unfiltered sexiness any day. Sexy I was, and sexy I remain. When I walk down to the bazaar in my thin, fiery, saffron or pristine white robes, men stare, mouths agape, and then hastily look away. They feel guilty ogling a woman they think has taken sannyas. Renounce worldly pleasures. Ha! Over my dead body, if only they knew.
Lovely. That really sums her up completely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's go to the questions which have been coming in. I think this is a question here. Someone called Rona Singh is asking it, but I think a lot of people would ask this question: why has the book focused on a Marwari woman? Would she have been from any other community?
Well, this was the community and a woman from this particular community that I wish to write about. It's like asking, not that I'm comparing myself to Tendulkar, but asking him or asking Kiran Nagarkar, why were their characters specifically Maharashtrian? I mean, it's a choice every writer makes. So, Gashiram Kotwal, of course, has um, historical reference points. So, I'm not talking about Gashiram, but a lot of Tendulkar's plays and a lot of Kiran's books were very specific to the community they knew best. I wanted to write about this community, which I admire, I'm fascinated by, and the character simply did not belong to any other community, and I'm so glad she's placed in this community because everything about this community is earthiness, it's robust common sense, it's in a way their passion for uh, all things money, their sense of adventure. I mean, the Marwaris have gone through the length and breadth, not just of India centuries ago. They're all across the world. Wherever they go, they manage to succeed. They can make money out of virtually anything and everything. So it's a community I particularly enjoy interacting with, and I also admire.
Yeah. So Rajesh Parikh asks, did you have to edit your ideas and language because you're telling yourself this is not how she would think or speak?
Hardly at all. It was really came in one gush or many gushes. And her voice was so very distinct inside my head that I knew how she would react and how she would speak. And the book has hardly had any edits apart from kind of spell checks. I mean, nothing has been rejigged, rethought, or a character killed off, introduced. The rhythm of the book, the way I wrote it, and that's the way it's been published.
Right. Uh, so someone says, how would you Pavi and Nick together ask, how would you differentiate between a Marwari versus Gujarati versus Sindhi way of life, especially in business?
That needs a book in itself, or three books rather. I'm not an expert at decoding business methods of the community, so I will only venture to say that SRILAAJI is not a business book. It's about a Marwari lady married into a business family, and it's her cultural and her personal and her sexual life that is of interest to me. And there are many other books and very, very good books which are about business methods and the success stories of Marwaris, Sindhis, and Gujaratis. So maybe the reader can read those.
I'll take another question on Rajesh Parikh. Because he says, does a character inhabit you continuously while working on a book, or do you switch off from for a day or two?
It's hard to actually switch off because you're so in the moment, so in the zone, and nearly everything that you do in the course of your everyday life is in some way or the other connected to. I was constantly thinking of SRILAAJI. In fact, I haven't let her go even now. It's strange. I've developed a kind of an attachment, and I feel somehow, she's become such a part of my life that even when I went out on Dashera with my family, I felt, why should I leave SRILAAJI out of the celebration? And I took the book with me, and I was happy to do that. I just felt good. She was in my handbag, and I just felt, I know it sounds weird and crazy lately. I don't know if it happens to other writers, but writers do crazy things. So she did live with me. She's still living very vividly in my life even now.
Well, then did you have her fantasies too?
Oh, Anil, I'm not going to tell you that. Who do you think wrote them?
So here's a question about fantasies. Are fantasies natural? I think you'd already talked about that earlier. When do they become unnatural or dangerous? This is asked by G Money.
I think better addressed to perhaps a psychiatrist, because I don't believe that fantasies can ever be dangerous unless you completely switch off from reality. Rajesh can answer this question at some stage, I'm sure. Unless you are so detached, so you're not in touch with reality at all, but live in a world of fantasy that you have created because you prefer it to reality, I mean, that's when actually you'd be in trouble. The rest of the time, fantasies are best indulgence. I mean, people fantasize about chocolates, all fantasies don't have to be about sex.
Right. Do you believe in a soulmate, or is that also more fantasy than real? Does Srilaji have a soulmate, Rajiv asks?
Well, SRILAAJI certainly meets a soulmate. Uh, she has two soulmates, as a matter of fact. One is the man she's married to, her husband, who happens to fall in love with another man, but is definitely a soulmate who loves, understands her, which is why she lights those two diyas in the end, right? When she goes to Rishikesh. It's not just for one man, she lights two diyas for him and for the last person that she's with, who's the kind and wonderful older man with whom she does not have sex but has something much more beautiful and meaningful to her, which is a relationship based on huge amounts of understanding, love, caring, and respect.
Namita Siddharth says, obviously, I have not yet been able to read your book. Is there a central message that we should look for?
Well, the central message is really one of self-belief, that if you believe sufficiently in yourself, then you don't have to ever be crippled by what society will think of you.
Yeah, okay. Utkarsha Kesarkar says, how do you find time to write multiple books, columns, and also lead a fabulous life?
Anil, we've talked about this in the past. I remember when I told you that I write approximately 1,500 to 2,500 words on a daily basis. That's like riyaz for me. It's like how musicians train their voices, and they never ever give up on that ritual. So for me, writing is very much ritualistic and a ritual that I adhere to. So there's a lot of discipline. I love what I do. So I never think of it as work. I think of it as something that makes me feel so wonderful about myself, about life, about people around me, people in the world. And no matter how terrible things may be during the pandemic and COVID creeping up on us, I feel so comforted because I know I will always have words. So it's my comfort zone, it's my crutch, it's my catharsis, it's my therapy, it's everything. Words are everything to me. So I love my words.
Yeah, I remember talking to you about this many times, and you say uh, you have to write 1,000 words a day at least,
Yes,
and that you've done for years and years and years, right?
yes.
And so when you write it, is there a fixed time for that, or and do you have a particular you sit at a particular place and write, and you write longhand like I do, or do you use a laptop? Uh, do you need complete silence, or the hubbub of life can go around you? Uh, is there a method to your madness?
There is a method, but it is madness for sure because my writing conditions are very chaotic. I write from a very messy dining table. I don't have a space to call my own as such, and I don't want it and I don't need it because I find chaos very inspiring. I like it's a challenge. I like to be on top of it. So I'm in the thick of domesticity. I've got my kids, a very energetic little Pekingese dog, and staff, everybody, and that life whirls around me in a crazy fashion. And I still manage to focus and I still manage to put those words down every single day. And that is the kind of discipline I enjoy. I don't like things too easy. I like I like difficult. I've always preferred difficult over easy. So it is a laptop, which my kids sort of threw at me 15 years ago and say sink or swim because we are not going to be keying in it, anything for you anymore, your columns and so on. They had their own lives. They had their exams. They had, boyfriends and preoccupations. And it was not fair to expect them to key in my columns. And I write, 4 a week, and I blog, and I'm on Twitter and Instagram and all the other hideous social media platforms we can no longer avoid. So it's a very busy writing life, and thank God for that.
So are you saying that if we put you in an isolation cell with complete quiet and so on, but with all the comforts, a nice laptop, a nice bottle of wine and so on, you would not be able to write?
I'd be blank. I would really just focus on enjoying my wine and say I'll get to the writing later, but not now. So even things like, when my family and I, when we travel to extremely beautiful sylvan places, and people around me I can meet sometimes strangers who walk up and say, "Oh, you must be so inspired here, Miss Day. You must be thinking of your next book, and you must be thinking of your next column. And look at the mountain air, look at the trees, you hear the sound of all the birds chirping, the river, etc. The water, the sea." No, For me, I'm looking at the river, the water, the sea, the birds, the mountains, and not thinking of writing at all because I'd be losing out on that. So I'm very much a creature of in the moment, for the moment. So I like my chaos and I like urban life. And when I switch off, which I rarely do, I switch off only to enjoy what I wouldn't sitting at my dining table.
Yeah. So, do you think if you're sitting in an airport lounge and your flight was delayed by 2 hours, 3 hours, you pull out your laptop and write a book? Would you be able to do that?
I've been mental notes will be on. The tape recorder never stops. It's taping all the time, and I am very voyeuristic. I'm very much a voyeur. I shamelessly eavesdrop conversations at airports. People sitting next to me. I get involved in their lives very often and ask intrusive questions. But I wait for them to ask the intrusive questions first, and then I feel I have the license to ask a few back. So people interest me a lot. Life interests me a lot. So, but will I write a novel? No. Will I take time off and start scribbling notes for an outline for a story or a book? Never. But I've been on a flight with Amitabh Ghosh, and I have seen him work at an airport and then on that plane. And on that plane, for some reason, I don't know, some god-forsaken place, somewhere we landed. It was one of those hopping flights, Odisha, some place. And suddenly the swarms and swarms of huge, big flies that flew in when some of the other passengers got off there. And he was busy with one hand swatting flies with a newspaper, and with the other hand, he was making copious notes and he was writing throughout. He was writing non-stop for those 5 hours without once looking up or even stopping to eat or drink something on that flight. So I don't do that. I could never do it. And that's why he's Amitabh Ghosh and I am me.
So, in a flight, you'd be talking to your co-passengers?
If they interested me enough.
Yes.
So it depends entirely on the first question the co-passenger may dare ask me on strike a conversation with me. I would never do it on my own. If they ask me something which was different from the normal, I would encourage maybe two more questions before figuring out, well, forget it. I mean, I'd rather pretend I'm fast asleep.
Right. Now tell me, are there two Shobhaa days and one who's writing these columns which are very political in nature? That is kind of fiction paper, magazine, and there's there was SRILAAJI.
Anil, I lost a lot of what you were saying. Your words broke, but I'm assuming you're asking, are there two Shobhaa days? One who writes the provocative or often controversial political columns, and the other person who writes fiction and tweets and does Insta posts. I would say all of it. There are multiple Shobhaa days. I'm sure there are multiple Anils. There's not just one person. We're not one-dimensional. Nobody is, and we choose to share that aspect of our personalities, of our lives, with who we choose to share that particular aspect with. So the person who is writing the political columns is as much 100% authentic and real to that column and to that job on hand as a person writing fiction, as a person who can be mischievous and playful and provocative at other times. And the person I am, with my children, for example, I feel I am most who I think the person I like within myself is the person I am with my children. The rest, well, we are all acting in some form or the other. We all have a persona we present to the outside world, and we all quickly switch to that. We are all good at it. We can switch very swiftly from one persona to the other. We are quick change artists. And why not?
Good. As long as you're happy with yourself.
Yeah.
Right?
No, as long as you know yourself, as long as you know who you are, I think that is one of the toughest discoveries in the world, in the universe, to finally be at peace with the person who you believe you are. and to accept that person and not fool your own self. You could fool the world, but at the end of the day, when you go to bed, it's you, your mind, your dreams, your heart, your disappointments, your hurts, your failures, everything, and you can't kid yourself about any of that. So as soon as you can, whenever that happens, some people that realization comes early on in life, and how fortunate they are. I mean, I'm 70 plus and I'm still looking. I'm not sure I've still found the essential person, essential me. But that's what also keeps me insecure, and I like insecurity because insecure makes you continue a quest. And if all quests were to end, that would be really dull, it would be very boring. So I love for life to surprise me, and I love surprising myself, which I manage to do sometimes.
Well, that's a great note to end on. And our time is up anyway. So it's been lovely talking to you.
Thank you.
And all the best with SRILAAJI.
Thanks very much. Thanks a lot. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for those great questions. Hi, Rajesh, from me. Let's chat soon.
Bye.
Bye then.